automatically, did I hear, on April 1st or tomorrow or next week?
Actually, I have to push it live every time, every time you start class, there is going to be someone who's going to push it live for you.
Oh, okay. I thought that was going to be automatic at some point soon. I guess I misunderstood.
Maybe someday it will be.
Maybe someday. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Philip, you are good to go. Have a good day.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Harry, take care. I'm live, but nobody. Okay. Hey, Joe, how are you?
Hey, Phil. I'm good. How are you doing?
Great, thanks.
So I'm here for the assistant as a TA.
Perfect.
Can you please add up me as a co-host?
Um, I will do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, everyone, for joining. Amanda, Barbara, Ken, how are you all doing?
I'm good over here in Hawaii.
All right. So it's still about midday for you, huh?
Yeah, 11 o'clock.
Still morning time. Good.
Yeah.
Hey, Leanne, how are you? So, Thomas, thanks for joining. Same, Susan.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Philip.
Hi, Susan. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
That's good
This
to
is a
hear.
picture of a tree that I took in my neighborhood. It's all orchids.
Oh, okay.
Isn't
Yes,
that beautiful?
it is.
Yeah.
It is. Maybe you can talk about gardening for us.
I don't think so. But thanks for the offer.
That's one of Frank Lloyd Wright's things. He likes to, say officially in a few minutes, he likes to commingle nature in the house. So
Okay.
we may need some of your expertise.
Yeah, it's not my house.
All right, that's fair.
Okay.
So, well, thanks everyone for joining us. Joe is on with us, and he will help me out with some questions or whatever. So just to make sure we're all level set here, this is class on the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. So thanks for joining, and a few more people may come on, but we'll go ahead and get started. You guys are here on time, which is what's good. So we are going to view the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. We're going to talk a little bit about him. We're going to sort of view it through his UNESCO World Heritage sites. And we'll talk about what all that means and unwrap that in a couple of minutes also, since that also might be a little bit foreign to some of us. So a little bit about me. My name's Philip, live in Chicago. Was in the corporate world for quite some time. I've left that arena pre-pandemic. I'm sort of glad. But anyway, I give I have a lot of interest in financial things, and I give a few classes and would get set up with financial. But I also, living in Chicago, I love architecture. And Frank Lloyd Wright, who was based here for his early years, is a good natural fit for that. And if you do enjoy this class, actually next week I have another class in architecture for the first time. It's rolling out. It's about a surprising small town called Columbus, Indiana, and the world-class architecture it has. So you might want to look into that either next week, or I'm sure it will show up for a while after that also. So thanks for joining. Joe is, like I said, my co-host, so he will help us out here. And what I'd like to do is just go over a few more little things about this class, and I'm going to open it up to you guys to help us see what you know about Frank Lloyd Wright and what you want to learn about him to help us out. But first, we learn from each other. So I know some of us can't do it, but if you have the ability to show your screen now and be live on camera, that makes it a little bit easier when we're talking back and forth, but I understand. We are recording this class. If you do want to copy the recording, it said help@getsetup.io. Here the address is on my screen. The recording is basically for training purposes for me primarily, but you, like I said, if you attend the class, you can request a copy of it. We are on a live stream with Facebook. So if you're on with Facebook, thanks so much for joining. If you do in the future want to participate interactively with questions and comments in a class, just join us through the Get Set Up link, and that would be great. And unless something very unusual comes up today, we won't talk about any products other than Frank Lloyd Wright. But just so we're all level set, Get Set Up does not pay or get paid to talk about any specific products, just in case something comes up based on a question that we have. So our primary focus today is going to be who is Frank Lloyd Wright? Some of you, I'm sure, have signed up, know a lot about him, some maybe not so much. Talk briefly about the UNESCO World Heritage. Then we're going to view his structures, some of the structures, and then we'll talk about the interest in Frank Lloyd Wright. So with that, if some of you want to just verbalize maybe a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what your interest in Frank Lloyd Wright, and maybe the rest of us, we might want to answer the question on the screen and chat box. which is how many Frank Lloyd Wright structures have you visited in person? So if you want to contribute either way, now would be a good time to do that. So anyone want to start off saying a few words about themselves? All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, please.
Well, I guess I will.
Okay.
I don't know much about Frank Lloyd Wright, but I'm really interested in this. And I must say that I invited Amanda. You see Amanda's iPad, and I think she knows a lot more. She may not speak, but anyway, I just invited her and she's on today, and we're excited to hear about it. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, and Barbara said she's seen Falling Water many years ago. That's one of the houses we'll discuss during this tour we have today. So anybody else want to say a few words?
Okay, my name is Leanne, and I used to live in Buffalo, New York, and I've been to his Darwin Martin house, the Blue Sky Mausoleum in Forest Lawn, Greystone or Gray Cliff. I'm trying to think what else he had there. Larkin Building, and then he's quite well known in the Buffalo area.
Now, did you ever see the Larkin Building before it was torn down or not? I don't.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Did.
That's one thing I haven't seen. Yeah. So
Yeah.
at Great Cliff, I have never been there, but it looks like a pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's beautiful. South of Buffalo, and that's where I used to live, was south of Buffalo. So it was almost like in my girlfriend's backyard, because she lived along the lake, and it's right on Lake Erie. It's a beautiful place.
Okay, well, good. Thanks so much, Leanne, for joining and sharing.
Okay.
Anybody else want to say a few words? All right. Well, we will go ahead and make the tour then. So first, a little bit about Frank Lloyd Wright. He was born in 1867 in Richland Center, Virginia. For those that may not be real familiar with the geography of Wisconsin, that's in the general vicinity of Madison, which is about 60 miles or so due west of Milwaukee. So it's really in the southeastern part of the state, is where it is. And then he lived to be almost 92 years old, didn't quite make that 92nd birthday. He died in April of 1959. Of interest, he was still working away. As a matter of fact, the last structure we're going to see, the Guggenheim Museum, he was actively working on that when he did pass away. He actually went into the hospital. He had some stomach problems, was going in for a quote unquote relatively minor surgery. And a couple days after the surgery, he got an infection and he passed away in the hospital from the infection. So he was still going strong at the time. So he does not have very much of a formal education. There does not appear to be any record of him graduating from high school. He does get a special dispensation and goes to the University of Wisconsin for 2 semesters. He does study engineering while he's there. He then moves to Chicago and starts being an apprentice architect and works for 3 different architectural firms before he goes out on his own. So back in the day of 1880s, you did not have to have an architectural license. You didn't have to have a degree from anywhere. You could get somebody to pay you. You could be an architect. So in essence, this lack of formal education wasn't an impediment to him. And if you ever heard him talk or looked at some of his writings, et cetera, clearly a very intelligent and intellectual person, just wasn't through a formal education. The most famous mentor he worked with was Louis Sullivan. Some of you may have heard of Sullivan. Wright and Sullivan got along very well. He very quickly became the lead draftsman, as they were called, the apprentices for Sullivan. And they had a great working relationship. They both understood each other. And from some of the things I've read, one thing that they had in common, which a lot of other people didn't, and of course we're talking way pre-computer, they both had the ability to literally visualize within their mind in 3 dimensions. And Wright could just sort of create a structure in his head and sort of understand all the concepts of it and then be able to quickly start putting it on paper. And apparently Sullivan had the same thing, and they both recognized this in each other and really got along well. Wright is best known probably for his prairie style of architecture, which was in his earliest years here in the Chicago area, and we'll view what is considered the quintessential prairie style of house in a few minutes. And he's also known for organic architecture. And organic architecture, basically in a nutshell, is everything flows together: the property, the landscape, the house, the interior, the furniture, everything flows together, and it's mostly local products. So we'll see some of that also. Wright designed 1,191 structures in his life, of which approximately 480 were actually built while he was alive, and another handful were built after he passed away based on his design. So pretty prolific as far as what goes on. Obviously, he lives during the Great Depression, and he, like a lot of other people, did not have much work during the Depression. And then he sort of revitalizes his career with Falling Water, which is his most famous structure, I would venture to say. And that's another house we'll see in a little while. There are 76 of his structures of those 460 he built or so were demolished while he was living. Some more have been demolished since, but there's still about 350 of his structures still surviving. And now you usually don't hear of any of them being torn down in regards to everything that can be done to keep them going. So that's a little bit about him. So UNESCO World Heritage Site. So what is that? So UNESCO World Heritage Site, there are 1,121 UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the world. So UNESCO is part of the first part of UNESCO, the UN's United Nations, dealing with their educational and cultural department. So to qualify for UNESCO World Heritage Site, a couple things have to happen. It has to have outstanding universal value. It has to have global context, and it has to be preserved. So in 2018, UNESCO World Heritage Site put 8 of Wright's structures, packaged it into one. We're looking at a brief look at these 8 structures. And these are the structures we're going to go into more detail on in a second. And they called it the 20th Century Architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. And they are considered one UNESCO World Heritage Site between all 8 of them. And he got this distinction for 4 specific reasons. One, his geometric aberrations, and that's pretty obvious to see. And if we look at these structures, or most of them, he blurred the inside and the outside. That's what Susan and I were joking about when we started, about how he really commingles nature and the house. And we'll see some examples of that as we go through it. And his forms are rooted in nature, in nature's principles. And then he has a very strong influence on the evolving American architecture. And we'll talk about some of that as we go through also. So with that, if there are any questions, we'll start digging into each of these 8 structures in a little more detail. So we're going to take them in the order of when they were completed, just to have some geographical or some symmetry to it. So, so this first one's completed in 1908. It's in Oak Park, Illinois. Oak Park, Illinois is a suburb immediately west of Chicago. Oak Park is where Frank Lloyd Wright built his home and then later attached his studio. So it's known as Frank Lloyd Wright Home and Studio now. You can view this building, the Unity Temple, is within walking distance. It's about half a mile from the home and studio. It actually it's a Unitarian church. It was actually the church that he and his family attended when he lived in the Oak Park area. In 1905, the predecessor to this building burned down. Wright gets the commission and he builds this church. So first look at this, doesn't look like your typical church from the outside. I think we can all agree on that. So even in 1908, just like 2021, the street that it's on, we can see right here at the very beginning, is very busy. street in Oak Park, a lot of noise. And so what Wright does is he builds the walls around, and then he elevates the lighting by the windows, and we'll see there's some skylighting up above it to try to buffer and seal out some of that noise. So clearly an unusual design for a church that most of us will see. But you can, as we see some other structures, you'll see some common elements that he's starting to develop here. This is actually poured concrete. The outside structure of the church which was relatively unusual and relatively novel for this era. So here's a look inside the church. This is looking from the pulpit, looking out into where the congregants sit. As you can see, it's not in the round, but there are 3 sides where the congregants can sit, and various levels also. So what's interesting about this, even though he's relatively young in his career, one of the first churches he's built was considered to be very acoustically sound. And another thing is that no one parishioner is more than about 40 feet from the minister if he's talking from the pulpit. So it is still considered architecturally sound. It is still a practicing church. The Frank Lloyd Wright Trust does give tours of the structure during non-church days. And also some evenings they have some string quartets that perform there. I've had the privilege, I guess, of visiting one of those quartets. And indeed, the sound in the church is, even though I'm no professional, I would say is very acoustically sound, especially considering when it was built. This was restored about 7 or 8 years ago, the inside of the church. And this is basically how it looks now. So here's some more pictures. You see a little bit more of the skylights. We see some of the artificial light coming down from the high ceilings that are stretched out to get him closer to the congregants. So we get to see some of his lighting. Another view, this is basically looking back towards where the minister would be standing. So again, a sort of unusual version of a church, what we're used to in today's environment. And then this building also has a community center. So if you follow my cursor here where these doors are, that's the entrance to it. So there's a big common hallway. So just like he builds some walls on the outside to buffer some of the noise, he puts this big common hallway between the church, which is off here, and then this community space or community center. So in theory, you can have activities going on in both at the same time without them impeding each other from a noise standpoint. And again, we can see some skylights and some similar characteristics to this side of the building as there is to the church itself. So that's our tour of Unity Temple. Any questions, comments?
I have a question.
Please.
When the church was being designed and built, do you know if the church asked for buffers from sound, or was that just something that Wright figured out was necessary?
That's something that he came up with from my understanding of reading it. There may have been something from some of the church, but I haven't read anything that it specifically was one of the requirements, but that is an excellent question. Also, this seats between 350 and 400 congregants at full capacity as far as the church itself. So he had a budget of about $45,000 for everything, including the inside of the church when he built this. So next, we're going to go to the Frederick C. Roby House. This is in Chicago. Specifically, it's on the south side of Chicago. It's on what is now is the University of Chicago campus. Actually, the university is now the owner of this building. They've owned it since 1963. And they still own it. This is a house you can tour. It's considered a museum. And tours are given by the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust, just like at Unity Temple. They do not own either of these structures, but do give tours at them. So I I usually say at the beginning that I am not an architect, not an architectural historian, nothing. I'm just an amateur lover of architecture, so don't have a lot of background or training. However, I will let you know that I do give tours here at the Roby House. I've given hundreds of tours within the Roby House, so I should be able to answer any questions you may have about the Roby House, hopefully. So please feel free to ask some questions as we go. So this is basically the last prairie style house he builds. It's completed in 1910. And he basically, excuse me, puts all the tricks of the trade that he's learned into this house and building the prairie style of house. And that's why it's still standing and why it's considered so significant. As you can see, we're sort of looking from the corner. This is a corner lot. So he really stretches this building and uses the entire portion of the lot to make it very long, very horizontal. When I give a tour of the house, I probably use the word horizontal or horizontality about 10 different times. So you can see that here. And basically the front of the house is over here, but he's really made the front, he stretched it and turned it sideways, and he's made the front be on the side street, which gave a great view because there was nothing looking to the south, which would be that view back when the house was built. So he gives it a lot of perspective and view. We talked about how he liked to commingle nature in the house. This picture doesn't have any, but there are basically no plants here, but there are 3 flower beds around this front porch area. And we'll be able to see in another minute, in another picture, this 48-foot length stretch here is actually on the inside a flower bed, and it has flowers the entire length of it. And here is an urn, big urn, and there's another one just like it at the far end, and there's another one at the front. So what Wright does is he sort of elevates the landscape up into the house. We consider our landscaping nowadays to be in the yard itself. He elevates it and commingles nature in the house, which is one of the things that the UNESCO World Heritage Site talked about, how he blurred the inside and the outside, and that's what he loved to do. So this is up on the second floor, the main living floor of the house. This is the living room area. So Wright, in his prairie style of houses as they evolve, he does not have basements or attics. But what he does do in a lot of these houses, the first floor, which is above ground, you go back and look at it here, the first floor here above ground, he uses some of this for some for some basement type examples. And this house, he brings the main living area up here into that second floor, which elevates it, allows more light to come in, and he really likes and appreciates that. Prairie style of houses usually have wraparound windows, like you can see here. Wraparound windows up on the third floor. Prairie style of houses usually have some form of cantilevering. So cantilevering is basically saying that one end of the structure does not appear to have any visible means of support. So here we can see that on the front porch. It lingers out about 20 feet past the house itself and doesn't seem to be visibly supported at all. I'll show you how it's supported in a second when we go inside. So again, this is the living room. This piece of furniture here is not original. If you go to New York, go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you may find the original. This is an exact replica. But again, we talked about organic architecture, how everything flowed together, including the furniture. This sofa is very long, very horizontal, matches the overall motif of the house. So the trust who gives the tours had an exact replica of it made, since the Met is not giving it back to the Roby House. You can see there's a hole above the fireplace here. And when you look through that hole, you can see that the ornamentation, the design's the same. You can see the row of windows all the way across, the wood ornamentation, the same lights. Wright really considered this whole floor one big room. You can see there's no doors on either side. He did not consider this the living room and the other side the dining room, like most of us do now. He considered it to be one big room. And he really opens up the spaces similar to what we do now. So that's one of the reasons why Wright's so influential. 110 years after he builds this house, we are still using open floor plans. And if you think about 1910, And before, a lot of houses were sort of Victorian style on the inside, lots of small square rooms. If you entertained, you went from room to room to room at night. Wright sort of breaks the box, as he calls it, and has less rooms, more space, which is not unlike what we do today. Picture of the stairwell coming up. And then this is the dining room portion of this big room. As you can see, now see the hole from the other vantage point of the fireplace, and you're looking back into that living room area we just left. So unlike the sofa, this is the original dining room table. So if you've seen any of Wright's buildings, he likes to have high back chairs. Almost all the tables that he designs have high back chairs. They're all different, have some different characteristics, but they are high back in common. What he's trying to do is sort of build a curtain or a wall around the dining room conversation. He thinks that we want you to focus in on the conversation when you're at the dining room table with guests. What is a little more uncommon, I'm only aware of 4 tables of all the ones he designed that have these piers on the corners. So that really brings in even more of an enclosure into the room. These were electrified when they were built, so there were light bulbs here in the 4 corners, which did add some additional light to the dining room area. So this is a view of one of the windows, as you can see, and here you can see that flower bed that I talked about that runs the 48 feet, and here it is planted. So lots of light coming in. Prairie style of houses have art glass windows throughout. The Roby house has been, I think, very lucky in that it has 178 art glass windows, and 163 of them still have all the original glass 110 years later. So only 15 of them have been damaged, and where replica parts of glass had to be done. After the prairie style of house, he sort of breaks away from art glass windows being throughout the house, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we see the next house. This is up on the 3rd floor. The Robys had 2 young children when they moved in. Frederick Jr. was between 4 and 5 years old, and Lorraine had just been born. So I can't say this is the first child gate, but probably one of the first child gates. You can see top of the stairs, original to the house. It's got a locking mechanism here. And you can see the same design that flows throughout the rest of the house with the right design. So I did a little research recently. So the baby gate was patented in 1906, not by Wright, by some gentleman in Boston, I believe, somewhere in Massachusetts. But this is probably one of the first ones in use, and looks pretty neat if you ask me. It really flows to the house. So what questions do you have about the Roby house? Any questions? All right, guys, I enjoy questions, but I understand. So now we're going to go back. We're going to go to Spring Green, Wisconsin. That's very close to the Richland Center area that we talked about where he was born. So this is basically the area where his family originated from when they came from their home country. Wright is Welsh by ancestry. So after building the Roby house, he leaves Chicago, sort of, if anybody has followed his career, under some personal scandals. And he builds Taliesin. That's this house we're looking at now. Taliesin is a Welsh word meaning shining brow. This whole property is on over 400 acres. As you see, I don't say when this house was built or completed. I say he began at 1911. In 1914, the house burned by a set fire. One of the servants that worked for them was mad and set the house on fire, locked the occupants inside, and Wright's lady friend, mistress, whatever you want to call it, they were not married at the time, and all her children were killed as a result of this. Wright was out of town on business. He immediately starts rebuilding Taliesin. Second time, same spot. And then in 1925, another fire happens. This one is not quite as dramatic, and it's a typical electrical fire. And Taliesin burns down again, immediately starts and rebuilds the house yet again. So he lives here for the rest of his life. As we'll find out, as he gets older, he also builds a house in Arizona. We'll see that in a few minutes. And he travels between the two, but he does continue to use his house at least for most of the, or part of the year, until the time he dies. So this house looks pretty big. It is 21,000 square feet. So not only does it look big, it is big. And it has 524 windows in it. So you see, even in this house, he takes away the art glass windows, just has to open up to nature. And again, he loves having those views of nature. Here, this is the natural landscape outside. He plays with that with these big windows throughout. This is the main living area of the house. Next portion, this is looking from one porch through via another porch and then out to the lake, which you can also view from the living room from other angles. So again, just showing some of the property itself. Taliesin, he never considered Taliesin to be ever completed. He has documented over 200 changes that he did to the house, always tinkering with the house. And he's, even in Oak Park before that, at one point he had 6 children. They all lived in this relatively small house. And even then he was constantly tinkering with that house also, with many young children. He sort of used his own house as a laboratory or an experimental purpose, and would change things and play with things to sort of help see how they would work. So I find that very interesting and unique also. Questions on Taliesin?
I have another question.
Sure.
I'm looking at all these windows in a house in Wisconsin. Were they double paned, or how did it keep the house warm?
Yes, they were not double paned. Wright loved to have a lot of fireplaces, especially in the houses in the Midwest. And I don't know for sure. I would assume there was some kind of heating in this house also. In the Roby house, which was built just before he started building this one, he does have a gas furnace applied to it. And Barbara, I have to be honest with you, I don't know for sure. I toured Taliesin quite some time ago, approximately 20 years ago, actually. And so I'm not real sure how it is furnished, but there are not double pane windows. You know, if you see these, I don't think all these windows open, but you can also see there's no screens. That was not uncommon. If you go back to the Roby house before, no screens. You open up the windows in the summertime, and as I like to say, nature comes in. Bugs come in, but that was, you know, the way houses were built in that time frame. You know, you think about the European older houses you may have visited, no screens in those either. So you sort of live with nature a lot more than we do now. But yeah, double pane was not around, and so lots of fireplaces. He always considered the fireplace to be the emotional as well as the physical center of the house, and that's probably why, to help us stay warm.
Yeah, would you say when he designed using nature that he designed a house that changed by seasons? The design of the house changed?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would, Thomas, I'd say the other way around. He would try to visualize the different seasons and, you know, build the house so it could take advantage of the different seasons.
The effect of all this glass and all this space outside the house, when it changes the inside of the house, not physically, but appearance-wise.
You're absolutely right. Exactly. And then what's interesting, the next house we're about to go see is out in California. So a long ways away from the Madison, Wisconsin area, and completely different from the standpoint, to your point exactly, as we'll see in a second. It's built around a courtyard. We're out in California, Southern California in particular, within the city limits of LA. So it completely changes the concept of the house. And we'll see this house is built around the courtyard. So this is looking from one end of it. This is the living room is behind these walls. So this house is built for Arlene Barnsdall. She is an oil heiress. She and Wright don't really get along. They both are doing a lot of traveling at the time, and it seems like they had some miscommunications. She actually fires Wright shortly before the building is completed, and hires 2 other architects to complete it. One of them being Frank Lloyd Wright's son, Lloyd Wright, who was an architect on in his own stead. But this one's actually called the Hollyhock House because Miss Barnsdall loved hollyhocks. So these are some live ones here on the corners. But what you're going to see in all the pictures of the outside of the house throughout all of this concrete visions of the hollyhock design throughout this house. There are hundreds of them wrapped around the entire outside of the house. We'll see all the pictures of the outside have a hollyhock like a ribbon all the way around the house. So this one to Thomas's point and question before. So here we're within the courtyard here. We'll see another picture in a minute where the courtyard is a true courtyard with all four walls sort of surrounding it with a couple of open spaces. So Wright has changed his perspective completely as he understands that he's out in California. And again, that organic architecture we talked about earlier is trying to merge everything, including the environment and the property and the weather, so to speak, or the landscape are coming together. So this house still has the art glass windows. This is the last house he builds that has art glass windows throughout the entire house. He builds other houses with some rooms or some sections with art glass windows, but he sort of decides after building this house that the full array of art glass windows is probably best left with the prairie style of house in the Midwest. So here's a view from outside, and you can see the full courtyard effect here based on the fact that there's an opening and a little mini amphitheater type effect with a water feature is at the far end. So when we first started the viewing, we were looking at the other side of this. So now we're on the complete opposite side of the house. Some of the bedrooms are over here. And then the living spaces is on the other 3 wings that we have. So the pictures we've seen so far were pictures that I took when we went to visit this house a few years ago. However, it is owned by the city of Los Angeles now, and they have, if you go on a tour, they have a docent who knows about the house, but they have 2 city employees walking right behind you, and there is a no picture policy for the inside. And I mean, they're almost breathing down your neck. You can't even sneak a picture. So this is not my own picture here. The rest of them, you know, of this house were. This is the living room. The reason I want to bring this up, and the reason why I'm saying it's not my own picture, because what Wright talks about with this house, he has the 4 natural elements. If you go back to the Greek and Romans, they considered fire, water, earth, and air, the 4 natural elements. And Wright pays tribute to that in this house. So I think the fire is pretty obvious for all of us to consider, fireplace. Water is we'll come back to that. Earth is the ground stone around for the mantelpiece of the fireplace. And then air is the outside windows, the skylights, etc. What's very difficult to see is running right about 6 inches away from the fireplace setting is a moat. It's about a 3-foot deep moat. And literally what happens, water comes from this water fixture, runs underground through the entire courtyard, and then comes up about here and then runs across the fireplace. So that's where the water feature is, so to speak, of the 4 natural elements. So just something unique and unusual that you don't see in many other houses. And so it's a play on the tribute to the Romans and Greeks by Wright in this particular house. I'm not aware of any other houses where he does this either, at least that I've discovered so far. So any other questions or any questions about the Hollyhock House? All right, next we're going to see his most famous structure, probably Falling Water. It's the one that Barbara said she'd seen. So this is completed in 1938. It's about 45 minutes southeast of Pittsburgh. It's right at the corner of a state park. So the Kaufmans are the owner of the big department store in Pittsburgh, and they own this piece of property. They use it for vacations. They had almost like a barracks type structure here. As it started wearing and getting older, they were going to build a house. Their adult son at the time took an interest in Wright via a book he read about him. He actually goes to Taliesin and studies for about a year with Wright, and he hooks him, Wright and his parents, together. And so they asked Wright to build a house. What they envisioned was a house down here somewhere looking into the waterfall. What they end up getting when they see the first design of Wright is what we see here, where the house is actually within the waterfall. And actually the Kaufmans weren't very sure whether they liked it at first, but they thought about it for a while and agreed in regards to building the house as it is. And obviously it's what makes this house so famous and so interesting. So this again is the living room. Again, some characteristics similar to Taliesin, lots of windows, spacey. You can see the water literally right outside the door. Again, he wants you to appreciate the water. A thing of interest you might look at over here where I have my cursor. These are two rocks. They come all the way up from the ground, are very vertical. In Wright's intention when he was building the house was that he actually uses these somewhat of support of the structure. He was going to saw them off basically right at floor level and just put in stone like the rest of the floor. Mrs. Kaufman in particular was a big sun worshiper. And before this house was built, this apparently was one of her favorite rocks upon which to sunbathe. And the family asked Wright to leave the rocks there. So he worked on it and said he could do that. So that's why we have these rocks sitting up here. It's based on Mrs. Kaufman's request, quite honestly. It's fairly close to the fireplace, so it doesn't cause a whole bunch of problems as long as you're aware of it. But you can see polished stone around it. You can almost visualize, especially here with the fireplace going and some light coming in, you can almost visualize this almost looks wet, the way it's polished, like it's water running past the rocks themselves, and obviously goes into the natural water that we see down below here. So again, like Hollyhock House, you can't take pictures of the inside. Apparently now you can. When I visited, you couldn't. A gentleman was talking a couple weeks ago when we were at this portion. He said now if you can buy the fancier, more expensive tour and you can take private pictures, and you also have a smaller group. If you go back to that very first picture, you can see lots of groups. There's 3 different groups here, and they're all pretty large walking through. So if you want to pay a little more, you can take your own pictures inside and you have a smaller group. But what I remember about this house and tried to find a picture of and found was the fact that you can see when these windows are closed, you have the corner casement. When the windows open, corner disappears. Again, it's another play on Wright in bringing nature in as close as he can to the house. So I just thought it was an interesting concept and wanted to be able to show you this. Back to the living room. So from that living room we saw around the corner, the other side of the fireplace, stairwell goes all the way down right to the water. We said they like the water, they like to be able to swim, so they could literally do it from their house. As you can see, for safety purposes, this closes and this slides shut here for temperature control later on, but literally walk right down from the living room right into the water. This is a view from another porch. This is the same stairwell we just saw. So literally, like I said, it takes you right down into the water. Any comments about Falling Water? Any questions? So Wright's over 60 years old. If you do the math when he does his commission, and it really reinvigorates his professional career. He gets on the cover of Time magazine. Falling Water is considered very famous. He builds a couple of other relatively famous structures around the same time, and it sort of reinvigorates his career. And like I said earlier, he was practicing architecture till the day he died. And, you know, I would say that now we have some of the architects that we call sort of star architects. And this is, I don't think that vernacular was used back then in the 1930s, but this really made Wright a star architect. Falling Water is really his kingpin of all the houses he designed. All right, now we're going to go out west to Scottsdale, Arizona. I told you when we talked about Taliesin that he also moved out west. So this is called Taliesin West. So in 1937, he completes this in the Scottsdale, Arizona area. So basically he winters for the rest of his life at Taliesin West in Scottsdale and enjoys the summer and early fall, late spring at Taliesin in Wisconsin. Some of you may know he has the Frank Lloyd Wright architecture school, and literally the whole class, they all pack up and move from Wisconsin to Arizona and back to Wisconsin again. So there were a lot of other structures at Taliesin where students would stay and where classes were. This Taliesin West is built more in mind for it being a school. So a lot of big buildings. There's 2 or 3 amphitheaters, or I mean some theaters in here for classes. This is a big area, dining area and relaxation area for the students. I have not been to Taliesin West. This is one of the ones I haven't seen at all in person, of the ones we're talking about. There's a couple, this is one of them. So if anybody has anything to share or add that can enlighten us more on Taliesin West, I'm happy to let you share your thoughts if anybody's been there. And it does have a beautiful view at night. People that have been there say it is beautiful. And here's right around sunset with the lights reflecting. This is, even though we're out in the desert area, this is a natural spring that Wright was able to develop. So this is water that's there naturally, even though we're in a mostly desert type environment. All right, next we're going to come back to Wisconsin. So the Jacob House, completed in 1937. Mr. Jacob is actually a personal friend of Mr. Wright's, and he challenges Wright to build a house for the everyman, to build a house for less than $5,000 in 1937 prices. So Wright builds what he calls a Usonian house. It's an acronym for United States of North America. So after building this, he ends up building over 100 Usonian houses in different parts of the country. A lot of them are in New England, specifically upstate New York. And they start getting some of them get a little bigger. Some of them expand in price, but a lot of them are relatively small. So these are not just, you know, like block houses. They're all the same. They all are different. Wright would either go to the site or get site diagrams and photographs of them and customize each house. So they do have some common characteristics. As you can see, or this is the backyard. So the windows and the entertainments are in the backyard, giving some privacy to the families. We'll see in the next picture. The front is very, very plain, very basic to save some money. Most of them have radiant floor heat. The floor is where the heat comes from. They also have a carport instead of a garage. We'll see that in a minute in this particular house. Most of them are L-shaped. This one we can see a little bit of the L starting here. And they're usually around 1,200 square feet, the original ones. Like I said, he starts building them a little bit bigger, but there are a lot of unique ones and interesting ones to go with the landscape of the house. Some of them are built next to ravines or hills, and he plays with that somewhat and has some cantilevering when they get a little bit more expensive. So the front of the house, like I said, warned you it's gonna be pretty plain. This is the front of the house, so it doesn't look like much from that standpoint, but you can see sort of some of that flat roof characteristic that he has. And then going back into the inside of the house, this is basically this area right here where my cursor is where we are here on the inside. Wright loves, even in his more expensive houses, he loves built-in furniture. So here we have a bookcase handling this entire wall, and then a built-in desk next to it. Sorry. And then all the furniture around it. And again, this would be a view that the family would have outside into their backyard. Dining room table is a little more austere, I would say, than the one at Roby House, if we remember that one. Again, we're talking furniture and everything for less than $5,000. So it's a very basic dining room table from a cost standpoint. So Wright does not invent the concept of the carport. However, he's the person that names it a carport and gives it that name. Basically, the Usonian houses all have carports, or almost all of them have carports. None of them have garages. This one, I believe, is probably the only one that has that cantilevering. We talked about cantilevering, so there's only support over here. There's no visible means of support on the other side. It's a little more expensive than building. I have not seen any other pictures where the carport's cantilevered, so I think he gives it away. I forgot to tell you how cantilevering is structured. I said I would do that in the Roby house, and I didn't, so I'll use this as an example. Basically, what's happening is some steel is anchored over on this side, and the steel runs all the way to the far end. So there's no visible means of support. So the support is inside of the structure itself, in this case, inside of the carport roof, and some steel runs across it, supporting it and giving it that support. Questions on Mr. Jacob and his small house? So if you look at some of the inside, this sort of is the precursor. We talked about the Roby house with the big open rooms and how that influenced the architecture. And that was one of the things that the Unesco World Heritage Site talked about. A lot of people consider the Usonian house sort of the precursor for the 1950s ranch style of house. So again, lots of influences by Wright that are still in existence today. So now we go to the last structure in our tour. Guggenheim Museum, New York City, right next to Central Park. It's completed in 1959. If we remember our history, Wright dies in 59, he dies in April. This actually opens in October, so he has passed away. There are some pictures of him with the structure. It's almost completed on the outside when he does pass away. This is a museum, art museum from the beginning. That's what it was built to be, and that's what it still is today. As this building was going up, it got a lot of criticism while he was still alive, that from the artist, there's no flat walls to hide stuff or to hang stuff, not a lot of light coming in. Architectural critics thought it looked uncomfortable, I think, sort of didn't seem to really flow right. However, shortly after it opens, it got rave reviews by most. Even the artists realized that it actually was a good place to demonstrate and show their art. Couple views inside the Guggenheim. He envisioned having the ramps, or not envisioned, he had the ramps. He envisioned you would take the elevator up and walk down through the museum. As you can see here, it looks like some people are walking up, but this is to get to the first floor. Obviously, you can go either way, but typically you ride up to the top and work your way down. Again, playing with nature's forms here. We can see the big skylight gives a lot more light than people anticipated. I almost sort of look at this sort of almost like the inside of a seashell or a conch shell. Again, you're sort of playing with some of nature's forms a little bit from that standpoint. And then here's another view of the main entrance lobby area, and you can see a lot of light, especially on a beautiful sunny day. So that is the Guggenheim, and that ends our tour of Wright. So just a couple of closing screens real quick. there are a lot of other art and art type classes and travel classes on Get Set Up. And like I said, I'm doing a second architectural class if you're interested. Most of my other classes deal with that boring topic of finance or fighting fraud. But please, if you have any interest, feel free to join one of those classes. And I will send you an email. You'll get it from Get Set Up, but I'll do it. And in that email, I'm going to give you a link. Besides telling you about these houses or, naming these houses and where they are, I'm going to give you a link to the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservatory. The conservatory does not own any Wright structures or give any tours. They're sort of an advocacy group behind the scenes, how people restore houses, etc. But the reason I'm giving you their link is one of their main links within that homepage is a link that gives you by state every Frank Lloyd Wright structure that is still standing. It tells you whether you can tour it, whether there are formal tours, whether it's you can stay in them. Some houses are B&Bs now or hotels. Gives you all types of information by state. So you ever have an interest when we can get back to traveling again and you want to maybe see a Wright house, you can check the area where you're going and see if there's any structures you might want to visit at the house. At least that's why I'm giving you a link in case you have now your appetite has been whetted a little bit. Also, you'll get a survey if you have a chance to fill it out. That would be great. I love lots of stars, but be honest, if this was a class that met your expectations, great. But more important than the stars, I do like to have comments, and I really pay attention to the comments. I've changed some of the screen, some of the slides that I've shown to give some different vantage points. There's one or two more I want to change based on some comments. And I'm just waiting to get ones at the Roby house. I'm just waiting for spring to arrive in Chicago and get some with the plants in it so you can see them better. But please give me some feedback so I can just continue to make these classes even more interesting and hopefully exciting. And then in closing up, please spread the word about Get Set Up, friends, neighbors. Let them know about Get Set Up if you think they might be interested. And if you don't want to be given a class, but you have something of interest and you're willing to do one or two classes, you don't want to do all the behind the scenes stuff, let us know. We can have somebody like myself or Joe, who's on here with us, is assisting me. We can have somebody like Joe or myself be on there and do all the behind the scenes work and introduction work. And, you could give a class once or twice if you would like, if some topic you'd like to share with everybody. And that is it. Appreciate the thumbs up, and I'm willing to answer any other questions. Or one other thing. Oh, that is it. Yep, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
right.
you.
All right. If anybody has any questions, I'll hang on for another minute or so. And if not, thanks so much for attending. We'll see you on another class with Get Set Up.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Philip.
And thank you, everyone. All righty. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Philip. That was a great class.
All righty. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, but if you're still on, if you have any questions, I'm still here to answer any questions.
I have a question, Phil.
Sure.
So the Guggenheim, this very rounded shape is so different than all the other ones we saw. Did he have a lot of other architectural buildings that were rounded, or was this a big change from what he was doing before?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on that, but I can say that we talked about his home and studio in Oak Park, which he built. He built the home first, and then a few years later, he attaches the studio. The studio actually has a 8-sided big room. It's absolutely beautiful, in my opinion anyway. And that really sets up him for the Guggenheim. So he actually built a house for one of his sons, I think for the architect, if I remember correctly, Lloyd Wright, we referenced briefly. And that is a house in the round, completely circular house out in Arizona. So it's not completely foreign to him, Barbara. Excellent question. Part of the reason this one goes up is because we are in New York. Land's a lot more expensive. Obviously, Art Museum wants a lot of space. But yeah, you know, there is some unusualities about how the top is actually larger than the bottom, even in that, you know, circular design. So a lot of unique things. But yeah, from some of the things I've read, he basically first did that with a studio. And, you know, this is built in the 1890s, and here again in the 1950s, he sort of uses some of his work from that and the house that he built for his son that's completely in the round, to get him to this big significant building.
Hmm.
So,
Thank you.
sure, that was a good question. So haven't had that question before. Luckily, I had a little bit of background there. So, all right, thanks everyone, and hope to see you soon on another class, another adventure. So thanks so much for joining us.